We are fortunate to have with us this afternoon a very distinguished journalist who is going to introduce our keynote luncheon speaker. William McKenzie is the senior editorial advisor at the George W. Bush Institute and an adjunct journalism lecturer at Southern Methodist University. Before joining the Bush Institute, the Fort Worth native served 22 years as an editorial columnist for the Dallas Morning News, where he remains a contributing columnist. The University of Texas graduates' columns have appeared nationwide, and in the year 2010, with the team at the Dallas Morning News, he won a Pulitzer Prize for editorial writing. Before joining the News in 1991, he earned a master's degree in political science from the University of Texas at Arlington and spent a dozen years in Washington, D.C. During that time, he edited the Ripon Forum, and he has also served as a Pulitzer Prize juror. Please welcome William McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Steve. And let me know if you can't hear my voice. I have a soft voice. A bit of advertising. We at the Bush Center, the George W. Bush Institute at SMU, we are very committed to the importance of reliable information as a cornerstone of our democracy. I should say President Bush is very much committed to this and interested in it because this is how we make informed decisions in our communities. And we've been doing that in several different ways, one of which is trying to spotlight through case studies how local newsrooms empower communities. So a little bit of advertising there. So on to my duty. We sometimes hear that a speaker needs no introduction. In Adam Kinzinger's case, I am fairly certain that is not an exaggeration. Anyone who spent just a few minutes watching the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection knows of what I speak. He put what he considered his party, his nation's interest above those of his party. He has even created a PAC, Country First, to support candidates who do the same. But impressively, long before that, the Illinois native got his start as a 20-year-old member of a county board. He later served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he deployed as part of the Air National Guard to the U.S.-Mexico border in 2019. And of course, he represented his state in the U.S. House from 2011 to 2023, where at one point, the bipartisan index ranked him 40th among 435 members for his bipartisanship. I'm pleased to say that my understanding that our speaker now resides in Texas. So welcome, sir, to the great state of Texas. He recently authored the book Renegade, and he is a fan of an organization called Ground News, which processes 30,000 news articles a day. It gives each article one of 7 bias ratings from far left to far right. And the goal is to help us see both sides of an issue and to understand context. And that leads us back to our subject today, trust in the media, and to our keynote speaker, Adam Kinzinger. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? Did you guys already eat or are you eating? A little of both. If you fall asleep, it won't offend me. I get it. It's like lunchtime. But thank you guys for having me. It's great to be at Ole Miss, and I was able to fly myself up here, so I was able to do this in an hour. It was only an hour to get here, so it's great. It makes it nice and easy. But one of the things I want to talk to you guys about today, because I think, with all this discussion that, we talk about what's going on around the world, we talk a lot about democracy, we talk a lot about the media. One of the things I think is important that we kind of center on and think about today is, like, why? Right? Why does that matter? Why does democracy matter? I guess I'll stay here because I'm on the TV. Why does democracy matter? Look, one of the things that I've actually learned in really the last couple years of Congress is something that I never really understood, which is democracy is the hardest form of government that exists. Now, look, I used to think that it was like pretty easy because what do? You just go, you vote, like the winner wins, then exercises a certain amount of power for a certain amount of time, and then you kind of wash, repeat, go through that whole cycle. But one of the things I learned, particularly on the night of the election in 2020, is that you have to have a contract among your fellow citizens, among fellow Americans, for democracy to work. What's that contract? It doesn't mean we have to agree on anything. Doesn't mean we have to agree on what the tax rates are or what policy, DOD policy is or anything like that. In fact, democracy and self-governance was created for the sole purpose of helping us handle those differences. But the one thing that we have to agree on is that if you have the right to vote, you can vote. That vote should be easy to cast. The person that gets the most votes wins, and then that person exercises power. And you have to have that trust among everybody that the system works out, which is then when somebody comes out and says, that an election was stolen or that it was rigged. What it does is it convinces a significant amount of the country that the system didn't work for them, that their voice has been stifled, that they cannot be heard. And I mean, if you think about where the United States began, we were founded on the idea of taxation with representation. We fought a revolution over the idea that we need to be understood and heard. And even if we lose the elections, as long as we had an opportunity to cast that vote. But a significant amount of the country was convinced on that night and further that a group of undercover blood-drinking Satanists who actually run the government stole that election and rigged it. Now, here's the problem, is once that gets set into anybody's mind and once that trust is broken, I don't think it's very long until democracy and self-governance falls apart. How do I know it? Because I've seen it. I mean, probably many of you here have traveled around the world, and probably many of you have gone to places where democracy has been struggling. And what's one of the things you notice, which is, it's not really that democracy doesn't struggle, not because the economy is bad or not because whatever. It struggles usually because people don't trust their leaders, because people feel unheard, and because people just feel like they are disaffected. So that's, by the way, why I got so passionate about what happened in 2020 and the January 6th committee, because I look forward not just as like what happened on January 6th was a bad day. We have bad days in democracies. But what happened on January 6th was quite honestly potentially existential to the fact that I have a 4-year-old kid that when he's 48, I want him to be in a country that's stronger and better than the country that I was raised in. And if we're convincing people that that's not the case, then we're going to be in trouble. Now, why does that matter, and why am I talking about this to you? Because I think one of the most important aspects of a functioning democracy or a functioning self-governance is the press. Because the ability to trust and hear and understand what's being said by your leaders, to put that through a filter of can I believe them or not, is essential for feeling represented. And I think honestly one of the great tragedies kind of late has been the disappearance of local media, how local media has struggled. When people feel that connection to their town, it kind of puts us in a much different mindset, right? If you watch TV, and again, I'm on TV, so I sometimes jokingly call myself a drug dealer. I'm on there, but I don't ever watch my own stuff, so I don't get high on my own supply. But if you watch national media, and it's understandable, it's all about what's going on in Iran, what's happening on these big picture items, but what we lose is what did the Girl Scout troop do today? What happened at the park? Did the high school baseball team win or did it lose? And it's that kind of media that I think makes us feel a deep connection to our community. And I know many of you in here are obviously involved in local media. And I want to personally just say thank you for that, because I think it is essential for us to feel that connection to our community and to our home. But you're under threat. You're being challenged right now. You're not being challenged because of, anything that you all did. Media is not being challenged because there's been some great unfair thing that the so-called media has done. It's being challenged because there are people out there that want to control the message, and they want to control the people that control the message. If you look at Hungary, okay, Hungary has been, in my mind, an example of what can happen to a democracy that loses its way. Viktor Orban gets elected, and over the period of 16 years, he intimidates law firms. He buys out media companies. He has the public media basically blacklist any opposition party from any access to public media. And all this kind of stuff happened. And, we were looking at, until very recently, I would always look at Hungary as a cautionary tale. As we need to be careful, this is what could happen. In fact, I think a lot of what you see in some of the agenda that's being implemented actually comes from Hungary. And that's not just something I'm saying, that's actually been said by some in the administration. But right when they felt hopeless, right when they felt like it's been 16 years, Viktor Orban's up for re-election, the opposition, Peter Magyar, cannot get on television, he can't have his message heard, he can't access the media. In fact, there's this massive groundswell, and we see what happens. Viktor Orban was defeated. Whether you love him or hate him, what ended up happening is he was defeated by a grassroots effort of people that said, we actually deserve to have our voice heard. We deserve a democracy. We deserve a free and fair press. And we deserve a country that represents all of us equally. And to me, it was inspirational because it goes to show that hope is not lost. And hope is never lost when you feel sometimes as though it is. And it's interesting because I said Hungary was both a model to us in the past of what happens when liberal democracies become illiberal. And now it is also an example of us, what happens when illiberal democracies take their liberalism back. And we're seeing that happen right now. But I started out by asking you, why does democracy matter? Right? Obviously, the hardest form of government. If we had a dictator, guys, honestly, it would be pretty easy. I mean, look, you might be out of a job, so that part, okay, maybe it won't be great, right? But you could find a job somewhere else, unless you wanted to work for state media, whatever. They may hire you as long as you can toe the party line. But dictatorship generally is pretty easy because you don't have to think for yourself. You don't have to know what's going on. You don't have to care about what's happening in Iran because you have no control. You have no input. The public education system doesn't really matter to you because there's nothing you can do about it. And in fact, if you talk to people that live in authoritarian countries, they say that what happens is very slowly your view, the way you see things, goes from here, where you're looking over here and you're seeing these issues of social justice, issues of economic inequality, and then your personal issues. And all that viewpoint shrinks. And all you do is become concerned with, do I have enough money to give them food? Are they going to school? And that's it. Nothing else matters because you have no control. Now, it's kind of funny to say dictatorships are easy because in our heart, we know that that's not the case. I mean, we know that it's bad. But why is it that democracy is so good? Why is it that the press is such an important cornerstone and that information being out there is such an important cornerstone for a functioning democracy? Because I'll tell you what, and it's not my opinion, you can see it in the numbers, but when people are born into a country where they can take a deep breath and they have an opportunity to be who they want to be, and they have an opportunity to take that creative energy and turn it into a business or turn it into social work or turn it into whatever they want to. Not only is it good for the rest of us because we're capturing that energy and the country is becoming stronger, but it's amazing for people's own personal quality of life. For this limited time we have on earth, the best thing we can do is live in an environment where we can express ourselves and be free. I mentioned I have a 4-year-old kid. His name is Christian. He is a terror, but I love him a lot. But, some days. But I always see him, and it's always interesting to me because I see him run around and play, and I go through my head, what is he going to be someday? What is he going to do? And I never know. Obviously, I have no clue. Actually, if you'd have seen me at 4 years old, I was carrying a campaign sign around. So it might have been a little bit of a hint. It was really weird, by the way, honestly. So I was in Jacksonville, Florida. I lived in Jacksonville, Florida as a kid. And a guy running for mayor is named John Lewis. And he was a Democrat. And I loved the hot pink yard sign. It was hot pink because it was the 80s. That was a thing back then. And I remember walking around my neighborhood. I was like 4 years old, carrying around a John Lewis sign. And thankfully, my parents let me do it. I lived in a cul-de-sac. So, the neighbors thought I was a little odd. But one of the things I learned from that is I think in young people, you can kind of get a glimpse of what they're going to be at a young age, kind of see that interest. That was a bit of a sidetrack there, but I see that in my son, his energy, his running around. And one of the things that I am so passionate about, and the reason that I keep recommitting to this fight every day instead of just, retiring and lobbying and consulting and never having to talk about this stuff again, is because I do worry that my son is going to be facing a situation where he's not able to expand and explore and become who he really wants to be. Now, when I ask people sometimes, when I'm talking about why is democracy important, I'll ask people, do you think America has a mission in the world? Let me ask you, and I'll just rhetorically, obviously, if you think about it, what would you say America's mission statement is? We all know mission statements, right? Some of them are dumb, but they try to reground us on what our purpose is. Here's the interesting thing. I ask you, what is America's mission statement? And you're not looking at me like I'm asking a dumb question. If I actually went around the room and asked every one of you this, you'd give me a different answer. You may have different, perspective on it, but it wouldn't be a strange question. But in a lot of countries around the world, if you would ask somebody, what is the mission statement of your country? They would look at you like a dog staring at a watch, right? Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean a mission statement? I guess the mission of the country is to build roads and bridges so that people can get around. But there is something very unique in our American DNA that question hits deep. What is America's role in the world? What is our mission statement? Now, I want to, if I can humbly say to you what I think America's mission statement is, what I believe, and it's very basic, to be an example of self-governance to the millions and billions of people around the world that are desperate for a taste of a little bit of what we have. Desperate for that taste. Now, let me use an example. So World War II happens. Obviously, in the time before World War II, America went into a very isolationist spell, a very divisive moment. The Ku Klux Klan in the Midwest was, I think, numbered up to 2 million people. They had a massive march on the Capitol. America felt like a very torn up, divided place. We had open Nazis. I mean, literally a rally at Madison Square Garden of the American Nazi Party. Open communist rallies, obviously very against it. There was just this feeling coming off a pandemic, coming off eventually a stock market crash, a terrible feeling. And then on top of that, we get attacked at Pearl Harbor. And America enters the largest war in human history. And a whole generation of Americans, by the way, a whole generation of Americans either joined the military or were drafted into the military, or went to work at a factory that in a period of just like 1 month went from making widgets to tanks, or built armories. I had one in my district called the Joliet Arsenal that was built in 6 months that they are still trying to tear down because it was so well built and so huge in 6 months that it's taken 30 years to tear it down. And it makes me sad because I love going there. But anyway. You think of that whole generation. They came together, they pulled together. We won a war against fascism on two different fronts. And at the end of that war, Americans had every right to say, okay, we're done, right? The rest of the world, I don't care if you burn. We did our job. We defeated the enemy. Europe, take care of yourself. Asia, take care of yourself. Sayonara, we're out of here, right? They had every right to say that. Because if anybody ever had war fatigue, it was probably the generation in World War II. But what happened instead? Instead, we left, I don't know, 1 million troops in Europe, both to rebuild Europe in something called the Marshall Plan, and also to begin to posture against this oppressive regime to our east. And something called the Iron Curtain came down. And generations of people lived in oppression behind the Iron Curtain. Now, we all know the eventual history, but what happened? The Iron Curtain was torn down. And why? Now, look, I would love, as an old school former Republican, I would love to say it was Ronald Reagan that did it. Right? I'll be honest. I don't think it was. I don't think it was. What tore down the Iron Curtain was the third generation of oppressed people that lived behind it, that saw what life was like in the United States of America and in Europe, and demanded they have a taste of that themselves. The first generation coming to terms with the fact that they were now under this oppression. The second generation, little rising anger, rising outrage about what they've seen. American movies being, in some cases, physically tossed over a wall to people. Magazines being smuggled in. Radio and news. Voice of America. I want to take a brief moment to talk about Voice of America, so I may lose my train of thought on everything else I was saying. But I love Voice of America, and I'm going to tell you why. I would travel everywhere as a member of Congress on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and as I mentioned, I would go to a lot of places that were struggling. And one of the things I would always run into is a reporter from VOA, and most of the reporters, they would speak the language natively, whatever that was, and they would interview me. And you know what would come out of that interview that would then be broadcast to the people of that area or country was not U.S. regime propaganda. It was not the great American president said today about the great American congressman that America is great and everybody in this country should love America. That's not what it was. It was a very fair article, in some cases critical, in some cases complimentary. But it was a fair article or a fair news story about whatever the topic was or about our visit. Because Voice of America was not there to pump regime propaganda into different places. It was there to show these people and these countries what freedom of the press was and what it meant to be able to criticize your own leaders. And that was revolutionary for so many people. I mean, and when we destroyed that, by the way, a year ago, it was the most devastating thing that's been done. One of the most devastating things that's been done. But the power of VOA and Radio Free Europe and all these other organizations was showing these folks what freedom of the press really meant. And so over that time of oppression behind the Iron Curtain, eventually the third generation rises up and they say, we have had enough. And they tore down the Iron Curtain. And millions of people today live in an immense amount of freedom, are the best allies to the United States of America. Because even though this was 40 years ago, they remember who we are, what we did, our heart, our soul, and how we changed their life forever. Sadly, I could go into how our alliances are being destroyed today. I think you all know that. But I'll tell you, the people, on a people-to-people level, the people that lived behind the Iron Curtain are still our best friends and best allies. Now think about that. Now I get it. It's not America. And it's important when we talk about this. It's important for America. But like There are kids today who are exploring their life and taking deep breaths because they have the freedom that their parents or grandparents never imagined they would have. And then I think about a trip I did. So there's that iron curtain of oppression, but there's also an iron curtain of poverty that exists everywhere. I went to Ethiopia and Kenya on one of my specific trips. How many of you guys have had Ethiopian coffee in here? A lot of you. Now, if I'd asked you this 15 years ago, I highly doubt many in here would raise their hand. So we do, yes, we would. But so there was all this great coffee in Ethiopia. The problem is the buyers of this coffee, or the sellers, were kind of held hostage to when the buyer came into town, what that buyer was going to offer in the price. And then they had to make a decision. Do I sell at that price? Do I wait till they come back next time? If they come back next time, maybe they'll offer higher, maybe lower, etc. You can see the problem. United States of America, through an organization called USAID. Ever heard of them? Yes, you have. USAID sent folks up there from the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or the CBOE, and they created a co-op, or they created a trading floor and an app on the smartphone. So now Ethiopian coffee farmers are able to go on their app. They can see in real time what the prices are. They click buy, sell, whatever they want to do. And on the floor, you literally see, like you see in the old movies, the high fives, the call outs, too, all that stuff. And we revolutionized just through this little bit of aid, the coffee situation in Ethiopia up to that moment. But the most important, impactful one is when I went to Kenya, and I go to this family, and their farm was probably the size of this stage. You may not be able to, obviously, but it's very small. Their whole farm was the size of the stage. On that was a house where they and the parents and the two kids lived. They had a couple of cows, and then whatever farm stuff was there too, but no space. And they began to explain to me how their cows used to only produce like a couple quarts of milk a day. It wasn't even enough to feed the kids. They were in deep poverty. But that a young guy from the University of Illinois, an ag major or whatever, through USAID, went to this town in Kenya and began to teach these folks how to better care for their cows, how to grow, feed, food for cows, cow food, whatever it is, and how to care for them better, and how to do this. And they said, our cows went from producing 2 quarts of milk to like 8 a day or whatever it is. And they're like excited telling me the story. Now we have enough milk every day to feed the kids. And then we can take the excess milk and we can go over here to this co-op, a small building that was built by the United States of America, and we can sell our excess milk there. So now everybody else in the village can buy the milk that they need. We get extra money. It has been life-changing. And they went from making probably, $50 a month to $350 a month. You and I would shake our head. How do we live on that? But to them, that was revolutionary. And as I'm telling this, as I'm hearing this story, like all around me, you start to see 50 or 100 people from the village coming up and standing around. My security's getting all nervous, and I realized they didn't come here, all these people in the village that, saw this guy come up with a detail in an SUV. They didn't come up because they were curious. They didn't know who I was. January 6th hadn't happened yet. Nobody knew who I was, the good old days. But what they did know is that I was from the United States of America. They knew what I represented. They knew what the American people did for them and brought them. And they knew that their life was changed because of us. Now, I got to tell you, one of the proudest things I've ever done in my life was standing there in Kenya and feeling that gratitude and appreciation, because what was a relatively small investment for the people of the United States of America created a community that you will never recruit an enemy of the United States of America out of. In fact, their kids and maybe their grandkids will tell the story about how their life was changed. And it's stuff to us that seems very simple. So when I talk about why is democracy and self-governance important? Yeah, it's important for us. It's essential for us. It's essential that our kids have that same freedom. But it's not just us. There's billions of people that look at us as that model and that example. And the key cornerstone of that is what you do. Your ability to call truth to power. Your ability to tell stories, be it good or bad. Your ability to hold leaders accountable. The fact that you, as a press person in here, could go up to the President of the United States, maybe not him, but anybody else, and ask a question, and they won't throw you in jail for it, that is so foreign to so many people in this world. But that is how you keep this democracy strong and accountable. Now, I know you guys are dealing with the question of what can we do to restore that faith? And I'll tell you, look, I wish I could say I know your business, and here's step 1, 2, and 3. I know your business from the other side, the guy being grilled. But I got to tell you, as much as sometimes that was uncomfortable, if I was being asked questions or I was being put on the spot, I'm going to tell you one thing, and I promise you this. It made me a better congressman. It made me a better candidate. It made me a better communicator. And it kept me close to people. Because if you weren't out there, if I could just put out my tweets to say whatever I wanted and everybody would just believe it because there's no other information, I probably somewhere in there would have gone off the rails, I'm pretty sure. Because there is something about power that if you're not held to account, power does corrupt. And your job is to provide sunlight. Now, you're going to have people that read your stories that don't believe a thing you say because you're the press. You know? That's not your responsibility to change their mind. Your responsibility is very simple. You tell the truth. You tell the truth. Is the city council stealing money, or have they done something with the money that nobody knows where it went? Well, guess what? When local media disappears, that can get washed under the rug. I used to represent a town called Dixon, Illinois. It was the birthplace or a home place of Ronald Reagan. Dixon, Illinois had the largest theft of city funds in U.S. history, and it was a town of like 15,000 people. The clerk there stole close to $20 million from this town over a period of 20 years. Insane story. But there were not people there that knew what to look for and hold her accountable. Had that happened, it may have been different. And just as so, telling the story about the girls' softball team that made it to state, you know, or the grandma that's at the home that has started a new program to try to entertain her fellow residents at the retirement home. All of that is stories that restore our faith in each other and hold our leaders to account. That's why you guys are a cornerstone. And I don't say cornerstone lightly. Cornerstones are essential. You are a cornerstone of the survival of self-governance. And what you do is more than just getting more eyeballs in the newspaper or getting more people to listen to the story, or how do we do better on the business side, and all that's important. But you're the cornerstone of, does this survive? Does my kid, Christian Kinzinger, when he's 48, does he end up living in a country that is better than I ever lived in? Now listen, I'm going long, but let me just finish here too. If you think about what every generation has had to do, it's amazing to me that we're on the 250th anniversary of America this year of all times, right? Kind of weird, but yes, we're here. But I also think it's kind of fortuitous because it is a reminder to us that for 250 years, we've had a torch passed generation to generation to lead us to where we are today. And even though we're in some pretty dire straits right now, we're still the most powerful country in the world. We still have a lot going for us. We're just in a moment where we have some challenges, to say the least. But I think about the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, who I believe thought they would die when they signed it, and maybe thought they would start something that over 50 or 100 years might come to fruition. You think about the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, one of my favorite presidents, not just because everybody's favorite president is Abraham Lincoln, but because every day Abraham Lincoln made a decision to keep the Union together and to free the slaves. Every day he had to make that decision. In all that, I think about my grandfather in World War II that stared down the Nazis after Normandy, could never talk about it the rest of his life. I think about the generation in Korea. You want to see the difference between self-governance and not self-governance? Look at a satellite picture of Korea at night, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. South Korea is bright, North Korea is dark and desolate. I think about the Vietnam generation that came home, was mistreated, and because they were mistreated, it made it better for my generation. When I came home from Iraq, there were people standing outside of the plane applauding, and they would do that all day for everybody coming back just to say, we appreciate you. And it meant the world. The generations that made it through the civil rights era, the generation that fought for the right of women to vote, the generations that went through all these difficult things. We have gotten things wrong, but we always come out the other side in a better place and succeeding. Ladies and gentlemen, we're kind of at that moment now. And unlike our friends in Ukraine who have to sit in a trench to defend against the hordes of the evil invader to protect their democracy, you and I aren't asked to sit in a trench. You and I are asked very simply to just not give up hope. We're asked to not grow fatigued. We're asked to make sure we stay engaged and not become helpless or hopeless. That is all we're being asked to do. Because if we don't give up hope, we will win this thing, and we will make America, regardless of where you come out on the political aisle, America will be a much stronger country than it is today and than it has ever been. We're being asked to not give up hope. That's a pretty easy ask. But in the moment, it feels very desolate, and it feels like we have a lot of despair. But that torch is being passed to us at this very moment. And I got to tell you, 250 years of the difficulties we've gone through, you and I, not only will we not give up, you and I don't have a right to give up. We don't even have the ability to make that choice. Who are we to say that the American experiment ends here? We aren't. Now I'm going to tell you one last thing. When I was flying out of Afghanistan once, I would do an aeromedical evacuation, and we would take wounded soldiers and flew them to Germany. Now I was a brand new, fairly new pilot. I was a young captain. And we take off. We take off out of Afghanistan, and I remember I check off, have the other pilot. For 2 years, I flew a KC-135, and this was one of those years. I go back, I see a guy that's been wounded, and he has a big head bandage, explosive device. I start talking to him. His eyes are flooded red, just red. And he starts talking, and his speech is very slow. But I asked him, I said, what are you thinking right now? Like, what's going through your head? Like, I was curious, like, man, you've been injured, obviously. And I thought he'd say something like, Captain, I just want to go home. I'm ready to get out of here. It's, all that. What he said to me is, he goes, sir, he said, I just want to go back to Afghanistan because I left my friends there. The people I knew that I fought with, they're still there. And despite all of that, he's just like, I need to go back. Now, look, I got to tell you, that's not an answer I expected. And that's not something you're going to find in most countries in this world. But that is something you will find in the United States, because we know in our DNA, in our heart, that what we're fighting for is something bigger. We know that the individual matters. We know information matters. And we know that if we don't give up hope, we will win and succeed. And you putting out the right information, the truth, doing so relentlessly, doing so without fear, without intimidation, without direction of the powerful, without being forced by the wealthy, simply telling the truth to the American people, you are an essential part of that. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.